So if we've got a post-millennial vision for the advance of the kingdom, and we've got a view for all of Christ, for all of life, for all the world, then there's a sense in which we're expecting the dinner table, what we eat, to be growing and advancing and becoming more and more glorious.
Mm-hmm.
What does, if somebody wanted to be at the lead of that, if somebody wanted to be pushing for growth and maturity in how we eat, what we cook, what do you think it would look like?
Okay, I'm going to say something.
My guess is more things wrapped in bacon. At least that's what I'm going to push for.
Yes, but I'm going to make it even creepier than that. First, I accept the premise that as the gospel advances and there's more people serving and loving God, and there are billions of us, in order to have billions of us now fed, you have to have corporate farming. You have to have industrial farming. Let's put it that way. Not corporate farming necessarily, but industrial farming in order to feed the number of us that we have.
Sure.
And if all of us are to have chicken sandwiches or steaks when we go out for anniversary dinners and so forth, and there are billions of us who have a right to steaks, then that means acres and acres and acres of slaughterhouses, right? That's what that means. Now, does that mean post-millennially, when I think that there are still billions of us and we're all well-fed and rejoicing and so forth, does that mean that I think that there's slaughterhouses forever? And well, actually, no. And this is where one of the things that I'm going to say something that's going to seem outrageous. I know. I know all about it. But let's put it this way. I think that post-millennially, we ought to be putting our food engineers on making steaks out of petroleum. and
I'll just stick with the bacon.
Bacon out of petroleum. And you say, well, they're working on it now, actually. Flavor engineers have done amazing things.
Yeah, but it's always like an MRE, which is just...
Yeah, well, that's the early stages. That's sort of like the first transatlantic flight was probably pretty bumpy and exciting and so forth. But you have to work the bugs out. You have to. Let's say if someone said down the road 500 years from now, if you had artificial steaks, artificial steaks or artificial bacon that was indistinguishable from the real thing, and connoisseurs.
So you're really leaning against this whole organic thing, huh?
That's right. People will object because they will say, "You're asking me to make eat a steak made out of chemicals." I say, "Well, okay, what's it made out of now?"
Cow.
Yeah, right. But cows are made out of chemicals. When people say, when people say that they don't, they don't like all the chemicals. I think, where were you educated? What the issue is? So if someone said, if you could have the best steak experience 500 years from now, the best steak experience that anyone up to this point has ever had, and no cow had to die.
Okay.
All right. So where's the, why do you have to insist on killing something beforehand? Now I'm fond of saying God is perfect, not a perfectionist. But let's if I could run my reductio, just kick it into heaven. Are we gonna be eating in heaven? In the resurrection, will we eat? Will there be slaughterhouses in the resurrection? Of course not, right? Of course not. And will the food be any good? Well, if you're the kind of person who says I want to shoot it myself and slaughter it myself and make it myself, and that's the only kind of good food, then you're going to be hard pressed in the resurrection. So basically, the thing I want to get, sort of the baseline thing here, is I believe in post-millennial progress. I believe that some of the initial steps of progress that we take are actual regressions. Some of the steps of progress that we take seem creepy or weird at the time, but now we just take them for granted.
But do you think we're moving to a meatless future then? Is that?
Well, no, not a meatless future. I'm talking about super meat.
Tofu burgers.
No, I'm talking about tofu that actually tastes good. Basically, I believe that. Let me back up. I believe that post-millennially, we're moving from the garden to the garden city.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a city, lots of people, but the garden city is Edenic.
Yeah.
All right? And there was, animals were not made fair game to eat until after the flood. All right? Now, there are some who point that out and say, all right, Noah was given the right to eat animals, and so we should be vegetarian. Well, that you have to take the flow of all of redemptive history. Paul says the weaker brother eats only vegetables. So a meatless, insisting on a vegetarian approach or a vegan approach now, I think it's just rankly unscriptural.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that God put Adam and Eve in the garden with a cow to slaughter. I don't think that's what was going on. I think that dairy and eggs and so forth would have been part of their future. But the fall was what introduced death, the death of animals as well as the death of human beings. And so we should be laboring, I think, to put an end to that, and should be laboring in a way that's not perfectionistic. We should be happy to eat meat in the meantime, and we should rejoice in it. We should insist on our liberty to eat meat, and we should not harm our brother for the sake of eating meat. So we have a structured layer of values with our brother, our neighbor, a God at the top, and then our neighbor after that, and then what we eat after that.
Mm-hmm. So how would this be consistent with Lewis describes sort of a mechanical world in that hideous strength, or at least the attempt to create a world where men are in control of nature itself?
Well, yeah, in that hideous strength, men are in control of nature because they're at war with nature, and then they want to clean it up and make it pristine and pure like the moon. Mm-hmm. They want stainless steel trees and mechanical birds. And
they want it all dead.
They want it all dead. I think what I'm arguing here is fully consistent. Two things. One, in that hideous strength, one of the main conclusions of it is the liberation of the animals from nice, where they were experimenting on them and treating them a certain way. Lewis was an ardent anti-vivisectionist, and just believed there are certain things you ought not to do to animals, and the animals are liberated. So what I'm arguing for is not a revolt against nature, but a return to Edenic nature. Mm-hmm. So I don't believe before the fall that we had stainless steel trees in the garden. I believe and when Paul says that everything is subjected to futility and bondage to decay, I don't believe that you had an absence of entropy before the fall. Mm-hmm. Entropy is going from an ordered to a disordered state. So for example, could Adam before the fall have shuffled a deck of cards? Right. Or would it, because it was a perfect world, would he kept coming up with royal flushes? No, darn. And then, no, 4 aces. No, you could have gone from order to disorder. Mm-hmm. Leaves fell off of trees in the Garden of Eden. They would rot on the ground. All the fruit was lawful for them to eat. And so when they ate fruit, it would go into their stomachs, and enzymes would break the fruit down and so forth. So I'm not envisioning a stainless steel world, a pristine world defined by Euclid. Right. I'm not envisioning Geometryville at all. I think it ought to be earthy. I think there will be farming. I think there will be plants. I think there will be compost. I think, in fact, because we're not eating the animals, there will be more compost. So I'm simply saying that eventually, over centuries, I'm anticipating a point where we can grow to the point where we don't have to slaughter hundreds of thousands of animals in order to get this meal.
Yeah. Okay. This kind of reminds me of just in your last sermon, you had a brief aside about denominations. And you were saying, now we know that there's a basic unity we all have and that we're working towards, but God hasn't taken us there yet. So the fact that we're in denominations is not a sin.
Right.
And you're putting eating meat in that same situation. We're moving towards a future where the lion lays down with the lamb and we don't eat either.
Well, the lion lying down, or the lamb is not given to us so that we will think that we have a better opportunity, we get a better shot at the lion.
Right. You don't have to lead them.
Yeah, you don't have to hunt them, because they just come in and lie around and bam. It's not. So there's a vision of universal peace, which includes sentient animals.
Okay. But that's a place where we're not there yet. So just as it's not a sin for us to be in denominations, it's also not a sin for us to currently eat meat.
And I think it's a sin. I think it's a sin, or at least a weakness of conscience, to refuse to eat meat in the meantime, because you've got an over-realized eschatology.
Sure.
Whenever you try to reach into the future and take God's promises for centuries down the road and actualize them now, that's the way to create hellholes on earth. You split churches that way. You cause fights between friends. If a bunch of people believe you find yourself with an ideology going, like a Marxist ideology, where you insist on perfection now. And so what you do, when you try to grab heaven in the future and make it real now, you don't create heaven on earth, you create hell on earth. And so I believe that we really ought to eat our meat with thanksgiving. How do we extend sanctification in the world? Well, through gratitude. So the thing that I really want to say this, when it comes to all the food fussers that I encounter, or the health fussers, or the hypochondriacs of different kinds, or the people who are, the fussing, the thing that is most characteristic to me about it is the lack of gratitude.
Right.
People used to die a whole lot younger than we do now, and we're just a nation of whiners and complainers about. But a lot of the diseases, we have this growth and this disease and that. Yeah, but these are old people diseases. Yeah. We're having these afflictions rise because we're living so much longer.
Right. I think it was the Anglo-Saxon average age of death. I think it was around 32. Right. That was as old as you got. And I remember looking at the skeleton. They had the skeleton of a guy who died at the. I'm trying to remember. It was one of the Viking Anglo-Saxon battles, and one of the things that was interesting is they were pointing out his teeth, and his molars were all. I mean, he was only in his 20s, but his molars were all ground down to nothing, and the reason was because when they would grind their grain and their corn and stuff, or I guess it would just be grain. When they would grind their grain, the millstone gravel would go into their bread, so you'd be eating your bread, it'd be just hunks of gravel in there, and all their teeth are all filed down, and they live to 30.
Now that's healthy bread.
Yeah, exactly.
I make fun of bread with the bark still in it. Yeah, but that's got gravel in it.
Okay, but you're saying that to reach for that now is the over-realized eschatology. So, is there a sense in which to project what that kind of meal is going to look like? We're kind of reaching into a future that we really have no clue what will actually play out to be like.
Sure, it does not yet appear. Right. Not only what will be in the resurrection, but what it'll be like 100 years before the resurrection.
Right.
So all I want to do right now, I don't have any specific plans.
I'm just nervous about steaks made out of petroleum. So I just want to.
Yeah, but that's something your great grandchildren.
These are things in a mist that.
Yeah. So you're nervous about that. But the best way, if that's a good thing, the best way to get there is to be grateful for the kind of steaks you have now.
Sure.
So, and not be a fusser. Right. So if you're a fusser, you're going to put off the day when whatever good thing is coming. Right. If you receive everything that God gives us today with gratitude, then you're cultivating the kind of soil in which good eschatological things will grow.
Because your kids are going to like you, and they're going to like the faith, and the kingdom will advance. Or you can.
And I'd be entirely happy to be wrong about the petroleum.
Sure. Okay.
But I don't think I'd be happy to envision in the golden era, right before the Lord comes, postulating hundreds of millions of slaughterhouses all over the world.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that seems to me to be an obstacle, a problem that we ought to solve. We ought to figure a way around that. Mm-hmm. But we shouldn't figure a way around that by adopting the vegetarian-vegan position, which is, I think, radically unbiblical. Right. A slaughterhouse is more biblical than a fusser avoidance certain foods.
So if you want to get rid of the slaughterhouse, the best way is to preach the gospel.
Preach the gospel and teach people to be grateful for the chemicals they ingest.
Great. A good note to end on.
Yes, always a note to live by.